Thank you so much, Heidi and Shireen, for blessing us with that. Beautiful music. Hope has a name. His name is Jesus. Wherever the message of the gospel has gone, it has had to contend with human cultures. It's had to engage those cultures and challenge those cultures and win men over to a different culture, a heavenly culture. We've begun to work on this whole question of cultural influence and cultural pressure in the life of a Christian. This actually goes much deeper than you might think. In fact, it might be said that the primary battleground of the Christian life is right here where the message of God, the Word of God, meets the influence of culture. It's the primary battleground of our Christian lives. In the old days of the Adventist movement, it used to be said that we were to be a peculiar people. Well, that word peculiar is kind of a peculiar word. It's not something that most of us long after. We don't lay in bed at night and say, I hope I can be a peculiar person. No, we don't like being different. We don't like being peculiar. But that's what they said. They used to say that God's people were to be a peculiar people. But we all realize that it's hard and painful to be looked upon as different, as peculiar. I think there's not a one of us that wouldn't say that we prefer to fit in and be at home in the crowd. And so we've taken up this whole question of culture and the pressure of culture on the Christian. And my hope is that as we work on this subject, we can gain a clear and simple grasp of the issues involved. We want to gain clarity. We want it to be simple so that with a simple clarity we can apply well the things that we are seeking to understand in respect to this issue, this meeting of culture in the Christian life. Now, in our first sermon several weeks ago, we made note of two things. I just want to review these quickly because they're important to get them fixed in our mind. We made note of two things. The first thing we saw is that Peter, culturally influenced as he was, actually stood up to the Lord and told him he was wrong. Imagine that. Standing up to your Lord, who's Lord of heaven and earth, Peter had just confessed, you are the Messiah, and yet moments later he stands up to him and says, oh Lord, you got it all wrong, you're wrong. And the key point here is that it was a cultural narrative. It was a way of seeing things deeply embedded in Peter's culture that put Peter at odds with the Lord. You got that? A crucial point. It was a cultural narrative that put him at odds with the Lord. But the second point, and is absolutely vital to note, is that Satan was behind the cultural narrative. Culture is not a neutral thing. And Satan, he knew the prophecies, he knew what was coming, he knew what the Messiah was intending to do, and he sat down and scratched his head and he said, how can I implant in the culture influences which will so shape the hearts and minds of God's chosen people that when the Messiah comes, they will reject him. So we see these two things. That's what we worked on in the last sermon. Peter stood up to his Lord because of a cultural narrative, because of cultural influence that had taken the upper hand in his heart. But the cultural influence influencing him had its source in Satan, the enemy of God and man, who didn't want Peter to be able to follow the Lord fully. So those are the things that we saw. And so there's the basic problem. The basic problem we're setting forth here is that Satan uses culture to seek to derail the people of God, to get them off course, to get them away from the truth of God, so that instead of taking their stand on the truth, they end up favoring some traditional or cultural narrative, traditional or cultural understanding of things. That's the basic problem. And culture, if we stop and think about it very long, we all realize that culture is a powerful force. Whoever has the culture on their side has an enormously powerful weapon. But then why? Why is that so? Why is culture so powerful? Do you all know what I mean by culture? I thought maybe I should stop and define a little bit. Culture is that typical way that things are done in a particular group of people. So we talk about American culture or Mexican culture or Albanian culture. Each group of people has a certain mindset, a certain understanding of things, and that trickles down through the whole of their lives, and they do things in particular ways. I think if I was to ask Pastor Wong, for example, how do you do greetings in the Chinese culture? I would hear something different than the way we do greetings in American culture. I know when we were in Albania, when you met someone on the street, you said, "How are you? How's your grandmother? How's your grandfather? How's your first uncle? How's your second uncle? How's your third uncle? How is the whole family?" And it was important that you said all of those things. It's a different culture. Now that's a very simple, low-level illustration. But culture also shapes deeply how we answer life's big questions and how we make choices and commitments. So that's what we're dealing with. But again, this question, why is culture so powerful? That's the question we want to deal with today. And so I'm going to start out by giving you a simple, direct answer to that question, and then we're going to dig into the Scripture so you can make sure I'm giving you the correct answer. So here it is. Why is culture so powerful? I suggest that the answer to that question is that God made it that way. God made it that way. We say, well, why would he have done that when you've just been telling us, Pastor, that culture gets in God's way, that it ends up being antagonistic? If that's the case, why would God have made culture powerful? Well, as a proof text for my answer, turn with me to Genesis chapter 1. We go right back to the beginning, the very first chapter of the Bible. And look with me there at verses 26 and 27. It's creation week. God's been moving through the days, creating our world and everything in it. And then we get to verse 26, and it says this: "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And then verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Do you see what these verses are saying? I got to dig a little bit, but it's there. If we think carefully about these verses, we realize that God is telling us that he did not make us to be self-referential. I probably used too big of words there. Let's try to break that down. God did not make us to take our cues from ourselves. He did not make us to look inward to decide what our culture should be. That's what these verses are telling us. No, he made us to find our image outside of ourselves. You see that there? You see that in those verses? Let us make man in our image. God made us to find our image, our pattern for living and thinking and choosing and committing and loving and all those other things we do. He made us to find the pattern for all of those things outside of ourselves. It's consistent with our nature. We are not gods. We are created. We are creatures. And by definition, to be a creature means that I am dependent. I cannot sustain myself. I cannot take care of myself. No, I'm a creature. I'm dependent. And so we are not independent. We are not independent by nature. We are dependent. And to insist on independence as a creature is to begin to die. You say, well, thank you very much, God, but I'd like to do it my way. You've got your ideas, but I've got mine. To take that approach to things is to begin to die. Because again, as a creature, I'm dependent, not independent. And so we see in this verse here that it was actually God who made us this way. It was God who made this dynamic of culture formation. It was God who made that powerful. It's the way he made us. He made us to look outside of ourselves to find our image, and in this way, our lives would be given shape and form. So that's a fundamental fact of human nature. Culture is powerful in our experience. And we can notice and we can observe this on every hand. I can't speak for the girls or the ladies, but I can speak for the men and the boys. There's a point in every boy's life where, unless there are particularly difficult problems in the home and in the life of the father, there's a point in every boy's life where he looks at dad and something wells up within him and he says, I want to be like that man. You ever observe that? I felt it. You know, maybe you just have to feel it. Maybe you're not going to observe it so much. But I felt that profoundly at age 10, at age 11. There was my father, and I loved him, and I wanted to be like him. This is the dynamic that we're talking about, that God put in us, that we look outside of ourselves. Is probably what I've just mentioned more clearly seen or easily seen. You ever hear little boys boasting about their dad? My dad can do this. My dad does that. You see them, they're looking outside of themselves, finding a reference point. But if you can't relate to that illustration, we see it broader than just the family circle. You ever noticed how children will start to identify with some sports star or someone who's famous or well-known in some way, and the next thing you know, your kid's wanting to get a haircut like so-and-so who they saw somewhere, who's famous. You ever notice that? This is the dynamic of culture. It's this fact that we don't look within to find out who to be. We always look outside to find out who should I be. We see it in many ways. People want to be like certain high-profile people. We look for someone to image. We are on a search as we grow up. Who am I going to be like? Who am I going to follow? Whose values will I make my own? And so we see this. Now we see this especially in the whole fashion and style industry, don't we? Most of us feel we wouldn't be caught dead in a set of clothes that was out of style. Which one of you ladies would have liked to show up here this morning with one of those 1970 era beehive hairdos? How would you have felt showing up that way this morning? Or for you gentlemen to show up in one of those suits that came from the 70s with I don't know, did the suits have the bell bottom? Maybe not. Maybe that was just the jeans. But you get the idea. We are deeply conscious of style, and we don't like being out of kilter with what everybody else is doing. And so the amazing thing about this is something that was in style 10, 12, 15 years ago is out of style now. You were just fine with it back then, but you wouldn't wear it now. So again, I just mentioned this. This is an illustration of the way culture influences us, the way the world outside of us has tremendous influence on us and our choices and our outlooks. Okay, so I think we've pretty clearly established we were made to look outside of ourselves for a pattern for our lives. And this dynamic is just within us. It is there. We all feel it. But note also this fundamental truth found also in the verses of Genesis 1. God was to be that person after whom I fashioned myself. Not the neighbor, not the president, not the trend and the culture as a whole. No, the one after whom I was to fashion myself, the one upon whom I was to fix my gaze until it welled up within me, I want to be like him. The one that I was to image, it was to be God. He said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness. Do you see what God's intent was when he created us? God was to be our culture. Not American culture, not Chinese culture, not Albanian culture or Russian culture. No, the pride of every person was to be the one who shapes my culture. It's the Lord of heaven and earth. God was to be our culture. This is why the Bible calls Christians pilgrims and strangers upon the earth. Christians are to have a different culture. The cultures of the earth are all corrupted. Even cultures within religious organizations can be led astray, can depart from the Word of God. And yet tradition becomes this mighty anchor. You present Bible truth to someone and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my tradition sees it a different way." It's not tradition, a church culture even, that we're interested in. It's the Word of God. It's God's pattern set before us. That's what we're interested in. So the cultures of the earth are corrupted, but the Christian, oh, be careful, Pastor. Be careful. Don't step on toes. The Christian no longer pays attention to what the Joneses are doing. Or does he? I don't know. He's not supposed to pay attention to what the Joneses are doing. He's paying attention to what one is doing. His Heavenly Father. What is my Heavenly Father doing? What is He like? What does He feel is important? What is He pursuing? That's my culture. Oh, the Christian is no longer captive to the trends and to the fads of his culture. No longer shaped by the prejudices and the attitudes prevalent around him. No, the Christian only cares for one thing. The only question he's asking or she is asking, to what has God called me? And how has He asked me to live? There it is, the image the Father set before us. My culture, a Christian culture, is the very nature of our Heavenly Father. His patterns, His commitments, His longings, His desires. The cultures of the earth are corrupted, but we as believers are to have God as our culture. We may well ask ourselves, do a little probing, do a little self-examination. We may well ask ourselves, what is set before me day after day? Into what do I spend long hours gazing? What is it that informs my aspirations and longings in life? What has the most profound shaping force for me? Now, the creation pattern, what God put in place, and what He sought to harness this powerful mechanism of cultural influence, the creation pattern was this. It's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. 2 Corinthians 3, which returns us to the Edenic pattern and plan. Here we have it in 3:18, 2 Corinthians 3:18. Here's what God longs to do for us. But we all, Paul says, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. Do you see the picture? To look into the face of God day in, day out, throughout my days, every morning, every evening, to look into the face of God. This was the divine intent. That the culture of the Heavenly Father should be that thing most impressive to me, most present to me, with the most influence in my life and my experience. That thing shaping me and molding me, the culture of heaven, not the fallen cultures of this earth. Beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord. I can remember I was 13 years old, maybe still 12. I know I was 13. And my father had just died months before. My heart was hungry for something to lay hold of. Now, I was seeking God even at that age because of the influence of my father, who had experienced a profound conversion just a couple of years prior to that time. But here I was, I'm seeking God, but at the same time, we would get films from the library, documentary films, educational films. Local libraries used to have these. You could rent them out. And because my father had been involved in health evangelism, health outreach, we had a 16-millimeter projector at home. And so we could get these films from the library and we could watch them. And one of the films that we got was about two young guys in their probably early 20s, maybe mid-20s, and they were climbing the south face of Washington Column in Yosemite Valley. That film was only about a 25-minute film, but it showed them climbing and the different sections. And I sat there as a 13-year-old and I looked at them climbing that vertical rock face, and something happened deep within me. This longing, this passion began to be formed. I've got to do that too. That's what I want to do. I want to climb those big walls in Yosemite. This passion formed down within me. Do you see, I was being culturally influenced. It didn't come just out of my own heart and mind. I saw someone doing something. I thought, oh, that looks cool. I got to do it. This passion filled my soul. There is a place, don't get me wrong, for hobbies and varied interests. And I have climbed that same climb that's in that film. But in every truly Christian life, one great passion fills the heart and soul. In the truly Christian life, that great passion is, I want to be like Him. Test yourself by it. Measure yourself. Oh, it's okay if you come up short and you realize, oh no, I'm really more interested in climbing vertical faces in the world than in being like Him. Or I'm more interested in having a nice 401k so that I can retire well. I'm more interested in that than in being like Him. Or I'm more interested in just being able to relax in front of the television than I am in being like Him. You may find some of that to be true, that you actually have competing interests. But if you do, there's a solution. You go to Him, you confess to Him, you say, Father, I realize I have valued other things more than being like You. I have passions that are stronger in my heart than that passion to be like You. You confess it. You cry out to Him. You say, oh Lord, save me from myself. Because in the end, there is nothing worth anything in the world except being made like Him. Everything else will pass away. I haven't climbed that many faces, only a few, 2 or 3 in Yosemite, and only one that was a 2-day climb. Because God intercepted me a few years later and He said, Rob, I know you enjoy climbing, but there's something of much greater importance. I want you to pursue Me. I want you to hold My image day in and day out before you. I want to plant a passion in your soul to be like I am. That's what God says to us. For every true Christian, this passion begins to grow in the soul, maybe weak at first because of the competing passions, but in the true Christian it gathers more and more strength. The passion, the purpose, the deepest longing of the life is, let me be like him. I care for nothing else. Oh, and when that gets planted, the life begins to change. Priorities change. Interests change. I'm no longer concerned with myself. I'm concerned with his purposes and the needs of others, and I long to serve, and I long to be useful to him. I want to be like him. I care for no other opinion but his. God wants to be our culture. Let's pray. Oh Lord, we were made in your image. We have failed that image in so many ways. We have pursued other things. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. But we hear this morning your call, come back to me. Place me before you, day in and day out. Look at me. Look at who I am. Let me plant in you the passion to be like me. Lord, that's your call to us. I pray, Lord, that for everyone here, that they would hear these words today, that they would hear your word to them. And I just want to give opportunity. If the Spirit has moved on your heart this morning, and you have realized, I have had passions that are greater than my passion for him, you just raise your hand. Everyone's eyes closed. Just raise your hand and say to him, Lord, I want you to be the greatest passion in my life. Lord, as we go from here, may we not forget these things, but may you draw us up and draw us onward in your good paths. In your name we pray. Amen.